Aha. Okay. So if I so if I'm shooting at 1/1000, what? Say what? So what does it mean for me to use a slow shutter speed? What shutter speed do you think this image was shot at? Faster or lower? Why?
Sorry, these things or are they moving or
Look at it and figure it out.
are they cars or what?
It's like when flash run, shadow.
Hello? Just look at the image and tell me what shutter speed do you think this image was taken with? Is it a faster or a lower? A longer or shorter?
I would know, but I don't know what this thing.
You don't need to know what it is. Just look at the image and tell me what do you mean.
As a photographer now, you're trying to get that thing. If you're using a low shutter speed, you would only see the lights and it wouldn't show. But if you're using a high shutter speed, you get the image that made those stuff. And those background lights, I think they are those of the car. You wouldn't see them like that.
Faster or slower?
Faster.
Faster. Faster. Faster.
You. Let me correct this. What you're seeing here is what we call motion blur. When you use the faster shutter speed, you're freezing motion, meaning you're freezing the action at that time. When you snap your fan and you can see the blades, you're using what we call a fast shutter speed. The openings of the curtain before the sensor of your camera is fast. It doesn't stay long. It just accepts light and closes. That's what we mean by a shorter and faster shutter speed. But we're talking about a longer shutter speed. The opening, the time it takes to open and close is longer. And when it's longer, what happens? It takes in more light into the sensor. And one thing you have to be careful when it's longer, it tends to give you what we call motion blur. That's the effect of a slow or a longer shutter speed. You have what we call motion blur. Last time I told you this thing is all about perspective. I may want this. Some person will say, your shutter speed is too long. But this is perspective. This is awesome. So it's all about you. Photography is all about perspective. So imagine when you want to go and snap the sunset. Is this sunrise or sunset? When the sun is going down. Okay. So when you go there and you want to use a faster shutter speed, you tend not to see the beauty of the sun when it's going down. But when you use a longer shutter speed, you can appreciate the beauty. So it's all about perspective, you knowing when to use it and when not to use it. Now, for this example, as you can see, I think they are frozen. I can capture the motion there is captured. It's not blurry. So this is a very fast shutter speed. So let's go on. We've handled this now. Just freestyle, blah blah blah. We're going to open and close. We will leave this thing. We've already handled this. We're going further. If you leave the shutter open for a longer amount of time to capture more light, motion will affect the. That's what I've just said. Okay. Motion now it will affect the photo. If you leave your shutter open for a longer time, yes, you may not like what you get. This is the proper explanation for that. You know that longer shutter speed can work when the subject is static. If I'm standing, you want to take me a group shot, you may not feel the effect of using a longer shutter speed that much. because I am not in motion. So you will not feel that blurriness. But when you take a longer shutter speed for a moving subject, that's when you see the effect, because anything that moves out of your frame be blurred. If I want to snap in and the person just move, the person, that subject will definitely be blurred. That is the effect of using a longer shutter speed. Sometimes you may be tempted to move your camera. That's another way also. When you're working, you don't know, you just move your camera. And when you move your camera, you have what we call motion blur, because you're using a longer shutter speed. Your shutter is open, so more light is entering into the sensor of the camera. Okay, I think I have a typical example here. I'm using 1 over. And one thing I will be using more is what we call the f-stops. That's what we use in identifying shutter speed. F-stop, I think mostly we use it for aperture, but let's go on. Okay, so as you can see, I don't need to explain what you're saying there. 1 over 2, 1 over 4, 1 over 8. So if you want to freeze motion, you know the shutter speed to shoot at. Then when you start using the camera, you understand better. When you go to the field, you understand better. Sometimes you're applying it, it's not working. You figure it out. So no, I believe there's no question as regards shutter speed. We've had this before now. So let's go to the order or the business of the day, aperture. Okay, I told you we're looking at 3 basic things which we call the exposure triangle, the shutter speed, the aperture, and what? The ISO. So we looked at the shutter speed. Now we're at the aperture. Opening in the lens through which light passes to enter the camera. We're still talking about the same thing. How does light enter your camera? How would you get in light to get what we call a properly exposed image? That's what we're looking at when we talk about aperture. So your mastery of this exposure triangle is what makes you a professional in the use of camera. If you like, know how to change your video system, which you've treated, know how to change to NTSC, power, and the rest of it. If you don't know how to manipulate the exposure triangle, you will not be professional. So your mastery of this gives you professionalism. Okay. Hope I'm not skipping your note though. Okay, as you move between bright and dark environment, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so if you've observed yourself, I am using a real life scenario. If you're in a very dim environment, a place that is very dark, just off the light here and let there be light in the other room. When you're here, observe what happens to the pupils in your eyes. Then go outside. You also observe the difference between your being here and being there. When you're here, it opens, the pupil is open more to accept light. Because here is dark, so you need more light. So it opens more to accept what light. That's to get more exposure. Then when you go outside, what happens? You're already going into a well-lit environment. So your pupil don't need to stress itself to get what? Light. You're already in a well-lit environment. That's what this scenario is trying to. So in photography, the pupil of your lens is called aperture. You can shrink or enlarge it depending on what the kind of amount of light you want to reach the camera sensor. That's why a cameraman will always tell you, please do not expose my sensor anyhow. Because if too much light goes into it, it destroys it. Most of those are photography, those long, deep photography, those ones that looks that you wash out the negative before they go and develop it. They'll tell you not why the film is inside the camera. You do not open the camera. They are almost, I think, 36 in number. So while you're snapping, you do not open it till you finish. The reel of film, if you open it and it gets exposed to light, you have just destroyed that film. And if you see where they are printing, we call that place a dark room. If you go to the studio where they print picture, it's not a normal light environment. It's a special room where they print. Because light, don't worry, you understand better. When we said, I told you light is photography. Photography, that's light. But you have to be very careful not to destroy the sensor. So a typical image is this. This is how the aperture works. Or should I say the opposite? Are you saying that hole there? As you're changing the aperture value, it's either becoming smaller or bigger. When it's smaller, it means you're taking in less light. So when you make it bigger, you're taking in much light. Yes?
When it's when the value is not spending much time,
When you increase the,
the value
Mhm.
is like
give me a typical increase in value. Like, and sorry, before you go on, you're going to be using the terms for aperture f stop. What's the f there? Focal length.
um,
So we're going to be using that word, focal length. So I'm going to be telling f stop these. I'm talking about the aperture, your aperture value. So when I ask you what's your f stop, your f stop number you're using, I'm referring to your aperture. What aperture value are you using?
for the lower.
You want to guess? Okay, so when I say use a higher aperture value, what do you think? Is it typical prime lens is from is, let's say 50 mm. The highest there is 1.8 mm. The highest aperture value there is 1.8. It can go as high as 22. So if I come down to 1.8, am I going high or low?
So you say the highest is 1.8.
The highest is what?
1.3.
The lower is what?
It's 35.
So if I say you're using a lower aperture value, it means the number is high. So if I say you're using what? A higher aperture, it means you're doing what? Okay, so this I told you last time. Your shutter speed and your aperture, before you can touch your ISO, you must have exhausted every option of getting light into your camera before you start tweaking your ISO. Your ISO should always be your last option for light. You know, when you start manipulating these three, the essence is to get in light into your camera. So for you to manipulate the ISO, leave it at a neutral value. You can start small, like 100, depending on where you are. If I'm inside this place now, I want to take a snapshot. I have to exhaust every means of getting light before I start thinking of my ISO. There's the video light here. There's bulbs that I can on them, or I can open the blinds to get in more light. But if I discover I'm not getting light, then I can start tweaking stepping up my ISO. But when you get there, so what I'm trying to tell you now is this should not, you should not skip this for ISO when you have not exhausted your option with shutter speed and aperture.
That question.
Ma?
So that when your f not
F stop.
get the aperture number, when the number decreases, and the aperture increases, right?
Wait, you say what?
When the number decreases, your aperture increases. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm to have an f-stop of 1.5, it means that, which is the highest, it means that the aperture, which is the opening to the sensor, is at the maximum.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, totally open. When I increase it, it means that it's getting smaller in size. Like this small one I'm seeing now, it could be something about, let's say, 20.
Okay. Another thing again, you also need to understand each of these exposure triangle has effects. For shutter speed that we looked at, the effect of shutter speed is either you have a motion blur or you freeze motion. Then for aperture, if the effect of aperture is what we call depth of field. Are we together? Depth of field. When you use the highest of the apertures, you tend to get more depth of field. When I mean depth of field, the foreground is totally out of focus, while the subject is sharp. Every other thing between the foreground to the subject is blurred. The subject is in focus. That's what you're going to
When
see.
you use a higher aperture, right?
Yes. The higher your aperture value, the more you tend to get
So depth of
depth of
field
field
is the number of people in focus,
out of focus.
out of focus.
It's not actually people, it's more like your background or any other details from your foreground. I don't call it background, sha. It's foreground professionally. Think I have a note. Okay. As aperture changes in size, it alters the overall amount of light that enters your camera sensor. You understand that? Where is that camera? The battery charge.
No, I'm charging it now. That's correct.
It means you didn't charge it. Was this camera left here? I came with it.
Yeah, I think you came to because you are.
Okay, doesn't mean that when the aperture is high, the less images will be in focus.
When it's what?
When the aperture is
Yes, now because you're automatically putting everything in focus. You're like opening it, and when you're opening it, you just everything definitely becomes in focus. If I increase my aperture now, the opening is very wide, and it's wide. What do you think will happen? More light, more light. Sometimes you get a very shallow depth of field when it's open for a longer while. I'm not saying with an open shutter speed you will not get depth of field, but you have what we call shallow depth of field. It's not going to be that pronounced as when you use a very higher shutter speed. Higher shutter speed, you can see that the foreground is what totally blurred. You can decide to use a very open shutter speed and snap, and later you go and edit it, fix it in post, and blur the background. It works. So a wide opening will pass a lot of light, resulting in a brighter photography. A bright exposure will do what? Give you a brighter, but when you give it too much light, like this example I have here, are you seeing the symbol there? That is a large exposure. And because of that, we're getting too much light into your sensor. And I said that image now is an overexposed image. But look at the middle one. The details, the sun detail is there. The sky, I can see the sky detail. The sea, everything is well balanced. That's a very balanced image. Then look at this one, a very smaller shutter speed. Less light is entering your sensor. So because less light is entering, that image will be dark. That's shutter speed. So these are basically the effects. This one is called an underexposed shot. This one that is not lighted, underexposed. This one is properly exposed, and this one is called overexposed shot. So when you see an overexposed shot, you definitely know. When you see underexposed, and when you see balance, when after learning this thing, even our eating technique change. When we go to eat, say, "Madam, this your food is not properly exposed." Some, madam, please increase your aperture and shutter speed. We are referring to Mendes. So after we finish cinematography class, we start even our normal daily this thing becomes different also. Yeah, that's yes. Okay, it's still empty. Let's go forward. Let's not waste our time here. Okay, look at this image. As you can see, the subject is well in focus. Are you seeing the foreground? You can't see anything. It's totally out of focus.
Around 8.0.
Hmm? 8.0. You can't get at 8.0. You can't get this depth of field. This is this is
This one is like about maybe 20 something.
me. I will shoot at 1.8 for this. Then I will this thing shutter speed definitely is where I will just tweak. This is a static. This person is static. So I don't necessarily need to get one kind fast shutter speed because the person is static. All I need to do, I can even shoot at manual. With manual, I even get more depth of it because I will not, when I'm shooting on manual, I'll put out in focus, I'll use my hand and tweak the focus. So I'm not shooting automatic where camera will be the one to decide my focus point. This one, I'm on manual mode because the person is static. So I will put my camera on you, change over to focus, then tweak the focus ring. When you're focused at 1.8, my foreground definitely will be blurred, out of focus. Okay, I think I have something on that f-stop. Okay, look at the f-stop. 1.4, 2.8. Now, if you have a camera's length that has a higher 1.4, you're doing well. The cameras that goes up to 1.2. The sensor, our sensor is everything. such as camera.
Now, what is the highest value for f-stop?
That is depending on your lens.
Let's not do that.
I've seen Canon lens for this 50 mm that is 1.8. I've seen 50 mm for 1.4, but I've not owned it. Okay, so lower f-stop gives more exposure. You understand what that means now? Lower f-stop. You know what I mean by lower f-stop? What's the lower f-stop?
Lower value.
Lower aperture.
Okay, it gives more exposure. If lower aperture, it will be
No, lower
open
value.
or
Is it the
closed.
aperture or the f-stop?
F-stop is aperture. That's the term I'll be using to refer to aperture.
I thought the f-stop is the number, while the aperture is the unit itself. Because the f-stop is the number.
I hope you know you're trying to confuse yourself. Sure.
The f-stop is
It's aperture itself.
f-stop is the unit for measuring the aperture.
Yes.
So that means I'm generally referring to what? Aperture.
Abi? So it is
Was
what?
that what I said? If the f-stop increases, that means moving from 1.4 to 16, that's the increment in the f-stop. But if the aperture increases, it means that the f-stop is reducing.
People understand that? Oh yeah, break it down so that they will understand.
From this stuff, they say the f-stop is increasing now from 1.4 to 2 to 2.4 to 16. At this rate now of increasing now, in the aperture itself, which is the window, is reducing.
Okay,
From 1.4,
let me
the
help
aperture
you
is the
out.
highest.
From 1.4 to 16.
It's reducing.
If I'm going to 16, I'm reducing.
Yes, the aperture is
The aperture is reducing. If I'm coming down up to 1.4, what am I doing?
you're increasing the aperture.
So if I say a lower f-stop, am I going to 16 or I'm coming down?
You're coming down.
Yes.
The lower f-stop, you're going to 16. You're going to 16 because when you're going to 16, that's when you do. It's getting wide. But when you're coming
No.
down,
No.
When you're going to see the window, is using.
So if I'm going to 16, it's reducing, right?
yes.
So what happens if it's reducing?
The window. If it's reducing, the window.
Lesser light.
If you're going to see the
Yes.
window,
It's reducing lesser light will come into the camera.
Lesser light will come into it.
Sorry. Yes, lesser light. Intelligence.
if your window is reducing, your window is less
Window. Sir, you say lower light, lower f-stop. From here, they say lower f-stop gives more exposure. And we know that more
no
exposure
exposure
is
at 1.8 something. That's why it gives more exposure. So that X stop like about it's talking about the value.
that means the aperture now is open
Yes.
and it's at 1 point something.
Yes, 1.something. And if it is higher X stop, it means the picture is going to be underexposed or
Yes, from the exposed for higher f-stop.
I like the way people are discussing. Me, I just stay aside and be who continue. This have you
I'm
stopped?
just based on what is written on the board.
I'm actually enjoying it. You are actually in order. Let me clarify you more. I have another slide that speaks better than that. Okay, so I've F16. What are you doing?
you're closing your window and your X stop is
Everywhere.
increasing.
F-stop.
So at 1.4, you are opening the aperture value, your shutter, whatever, to get more light.
Yeah, and your X stop is.
That's what I was like to say.
Is what you're trying to say.
It's not what it's not what you're trying
Yeah, it's what we're trying to say.
like inversely proportional.
Okay, so now you understand what I'm talking about. So 2.8 is what?
More like a higher,
High.
a bit higher.
It's high. But the cameras that their maximum aperture value is 2.8. That's a faster lens. The way you know a fast lens and a low lens is from the f-stop value. When you pick a lens, a typical lens, look at the top. You'll see, don't know what the lens is. That's 18 to 55 millimeter lens. Look at it, you'll see the f-stop 3.5. That's a slow lens. You know what I mean by slow lens, right?
Yeah.
A fast lens and a slow lens.
According to what you said.
It's a when you see a camera that goes up to aperture value goes up to 1.4. That's a very fast lens. That lens is
I think I'm
It's
only my fast.
it's fast. It will give you what we call a very sharp image, a very crisp image with lots of depth of field. When you snap with such kind of lens, you get a very sharp image, an image that has that when you can get lots of depth of field. Like for this 18 to 55 millimeter now, the maximum is 3.5. So for you to create depth of field with 18 to 55, you have to create a distance between your foreground and the subject, and the subject and the person that is snapping. Do you understand me? With 18 to 55 millimeter lens, you cannot just get depth of field by increasing, because 3.5 is a slow lens. It does not avail you that opportunity to get depth of field anyhow. You have to be the one to create it. Create a distance between your foreground and the subject, and the subject between the subject and you. You tend to get depth of field. I've tried it.
Because I want to be blown out from everybody, and I have to like give you space from there.
Yes.
Your camera.
Yeah,
That's what I tell you. You still do. Yeah,
it works for me. I don't know how it works for that person, but that's how I create depth of field with a slow lens. Okay, so let's do the same thing. The lower the f-stop, the larger the opening. The less I'm trying to rush this class, I'm slowing. Look at this image. 2.8, less depth of field. 11. Great.
Yes.
This should be a Nikon camera.
Sorry.
This is a Nikon camera. Okay, so this will be the end of aperture. So I'm not doing the calculation part of it. The f-stop. Okay, ISO. Question, make it snappy.
Aperture set at 2.8. Lens depth of field.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, depth of field is
Look at the background.
Is the background.
This second one has more things in focus. This one has just
like,
so
I mean, they said less depth of field. More and depth of field.
Okay, people have answered the question. Sure. You've asked the question, you still answered it. It's a very good one. Okay, so let's save our time. You've answered the question, you still want me to still say
But
something?
there
ISO. Then you still answered it. I heard you answer your question. ISO. Normal, what's the meaning of ISO?
international standard organization.
You're doing well. That's actually what it means. That's actually what the camera ISO means. International Standard Organization. That is actually what it's used. Is the ISO, the International Organization, is an entity that sets standard. Now, when they set standard, every industry tends to follow that standard. So there is a standard that has been set by the ISO as a body. Yes. Yes, that is it. You're shocked. So that is actually what it means. He's correct. I told you that the International Standard Organization is a standardization company. What they do is to set box with it. Now we have A4 paper. A4 paper has been set. The ISO has given us that standard, A4 paper. Even if you go to Afghanistan, A4 paper is A4 paper. Pakistan and the two, whatever they are fighting, the same A4, this one is using the same A4 this country will use. The International Standard Organization has set it like that. So when it comes to the ISO as a camera feature, they decided to use this. Okay, I would have loved to go deep to explain why they used it, but let's just take it that they decided to use it out of why they know better. Sha. I'm trying not to go deeper. Okay, so when we're talking about ISO, ISO is what controls the light sensitivity of your camera sensor. How does your camera react to the sensitivity of light? That is what the ISO does for you. How does that thing you have with you react to light? The sensitivity of your camera to light is determined by your ISO. That's why I said if you go too much, if you go with a too much ISO, you have what we call grains. I've talked about this before, which we will otherwise call noise. Are we lost? Okay. So when I said exhaust other option before you use the ISO is to avoid noise. If you're able to balance your shutter speed and your aperture and you don't have light, start from 100, 200, 400, 800. For me, I always tell my students not to even exceed 800. Don't exceed, try as much as possible not to exceed 800.
What the heck?
It goes now, it goes as high as 1,600, 300.
Have a question.
Go ahead.
I was telling you about detail.
Pixel, yes.
That's square box.
That's for resolution, yes.
And you also know about noises. My question is that are noises left as pixels? Maybe when you snap, the
Mm-mm.
noise the pixels get big
Mm-mm.
and become visible.
Pixel has to do with your resolution. Pixel in anything is what determines the quality. In your phone, if your picture will have to be sharp, it means there's a lot of pixels. And the higher the pixel, the more quality your image tends to be. Most of you start boasting, my phone gives me nice snapshot, but when I scale into the picture, when I zoom into it, you discover that it's blurred. But when you're looking at it from a long distance, it's quite okay. So pixel is synonymous to more of a resolution. Even in your printer, just like I told you, dot per inch. If you want a printer that prints a high quality image, get the one that has a higher DPI, because the quality of your printouts is determined by the DPI, dot per inch. But when we talk about noise, we are not talking about resolution. We're talking about those dots you see in your video. Sometimes you snap an image with a very high ISO, you start getting grains. Noise
Yeah, but
is,
if you use a phone and say okay, you go to the picture or sharpen it. When you over sharpen a picture, that's the range.
I know we tend to manipulate noise. We have features in Photoshop that helps us, but when you're, if you kill the details, that's what's really matter. You're killing the authenticity of that image. The originality is reduced. Yes, you may be able to manipulate it and edit it and step it up, but the fact is that details, sensitive details have been killed, murdered.
Yeah, one more question. I
Hmm?
heard that somebody told me that not somebody. You have been saying that if you use the camera and another picture, it will be nice. But if you send that picture maybe through chat and Facebook,
Yeah, quality
the
will drop.
quality will drop. These are the pixels not being used.
For Facebook,
Yes.
no. One thing about Facebook is Facebook has a size it drops your image. When you edit a picture, you're supposed to export your image in a way that Facebook will not. If your picture is 1 megabyte, Facebook will definitely drop it to 200 and almost 250 kilobytes. And when it drops your quality. It compresses everything, meaning there are some things that will be dropped. That's why sometimes the picture gets blurred. So all you need to get the right saving format for Facebook. So that when you upload it, all the pictures will be intact. If I want to go for a photo shoot, I have to make the client understand that these pictures are going on Facebook. So give me that Facebook saving format. So now when I upload it, the resolution is still there. If not, Facebook drops it. If you like, snap and edit, let it be 10 megabytes, it will drop it for you. Yep. Okay. I told you this ISO is not what we talk too much. It's when you start using the camera. All you need to do, you need to understand that it's to take in light. Just 100, 200, depending on the value. As you're using them, you're seeing the light effect. You have to be very alert when you're videoing. I told you your different scenarios, the different scenes will change. I am shooting right now. Before you know, the cloud, the sun goes under the cloud, it changes. As someone that is alert, you know when to tweak which one. Right now, the sun is out. My exposure is not is okay. As soon as the sun goes down, the exposure is down. All you need to do, which one should I tweak up immediately? You have to be alert. Don't keep your camera and you're looking at, you're discussing. You have to be alert. Right now, I'm editing a funeral video. One camera is 800D. One camera is Canon, I think Canon 2, 6D Mark II. The effect, the color balancing, white balancing is totally different. Is totally different. So just I failed to look at the 800D to make sure it correspond. Now it's giving me stress. So you just have to be alert. Any question? I think at the end of this class, if I'm coming here again, it's going to be camera. I don't think I want to touch theory again. The only thing is you're not doing advanced. We'll start talking about the business of photography, videography. We'll start looking at conflict, types of conflict, and the rest of it. I will not be going deep. That's advanced class. Types of conflict and the rest of it. So you have to start practical. With this, you can handle photography and videography. The only thing that you may not be able to construct a script because you have to learn what conflict is, you have to learn what storytelling is, how to tell story. And even in photography, you must learn to tell story with your photographs. For me, picture becomes uninteresting when I cannot tell a story from your image. So that's why I love concept. I'm not a regular photographer. I like to just create concepts. I don't just move. I want to snap you, I carry you. No. I just call someone else to go and snap you. I like concepts. Let's just create concepts. That's my own kind of photography. I don't do anyhow photography. But videography can video anything. Okay, so that is that for that. Any question? This class is broad. I'm trying to cut it so that we spend more time in practical. The other camera I have sent for servicing, you can use it for settings and everything. But I discover it's not detecting card. If I put card, it does not, the 800D. These are things you're going to meet as challenge. These things are equipment. All of a sudden, it can just stay and fail you. And the day that camera decided to fail me was the day I had a major job. Imagine if I don't have a good relationship with my colleagues. It's been a terrible one. So, ask a question. That camera is for usage. Oh. This is 4000D. You have to get to know cameras so that you know the kind of camera that fits you. This is no, I came with this and another camera. And before the weekend, that one should be back to Bonnie.
Okay.
No,
Focus on the one you have. So
no, son.
Sir, I'm trying to stand this Canon 1 billion.
No, not.
1 billion.
so give me that camera.
What if you have two different cameras or different products? And you say, this one is Canon, or 1,000. It's the one has two and your video. And then you set some of them now in automatic white balance. So if there's a change in the weather around you, it's only automatic balance.
Now you see why that my issue came because I was using Max 6, a very high when I made high camera, and I was complementing it with Canon 800D. I wish I had shot in flat profile. I would have actually loved it.
What is that? What is that?
Thought to discuss flat profile. You were not here. It was not here, right? Normally, photographers, professionally, you tend to shoot in flat profile. When you see a flat profile, a picture taken in flat profile, it's like the color is not pronounced. Everything is dim, it's flat. The colors are just not normal. It's dimmed. It's when you go to post, you now step up the color. I'm speaking French, right? Don't worry, I'll look for example and bring. But you have to install it. But these days we don't shoot in flat. We just shoot normally because some clients will just prefer you just take your pic. They give them their picture in the raw state. When you shoot in flat profile, your red will be very dim. When you go to edit, you step up all this color. You want to take me advance? Any other question? Okay, so you have to learn to use different cameras. You cannot say I'm used to Canon, and when you say Nikon or Nikon, you start misbehaving. The settings, every settings you need to learn. Just look for their locations in the camera. You may tell me that the settings, the arrangement is different, but everything is everything. Aperture, the spatial triangle is something you get in, something you get here is something you get in Nikon or any other camera. Just know how to tweak it. So this camera is 4000D. It's one camera most of my students don't like using. Me myself, I'll tell you the truth, I don't like using 4000D. When I started touching this camera is when an amateur, a student that just started, that is not up to 2 weeks, gave me a shot that wowed me with this camera. And I gave my time to studying this camera. So I now understand the kind of scene I will use this camera and shoot. So you see this, it's also a good camera. You just need to understand how to use it. So I believe there's battery inside. Okay. It's open. Maybe from next week you may be having two cameras. Ladies, before gentlemen.
So that image,
I will leave this camera here. Yes, I will leave this camera here. Just do well to charge the battery, and I think there's a card inside, but do not delete the snapshot. Do not video possibly, so that you don't fill the card.
And this is
Yes, it will be with the manager. So it will be open for